Hi, it's Anni Silverdale Poole again, and I wanted to share with you some aspects of spiritual coaching that might be able to help you think in a different way. So, I want to choose a topic of identity, and I want you to consider who you are and how you came to be who you are. Because if you think about when babies are born, they aren't really born with a story. They come as a kind of a blank sheet, don't they? And they come into the family or a family or a set of circumstances, and then they begin to take on board the subjects and the objects of that family. And some of it might be surrounded in love initially, but eventually there'll be conditional beliefs that family has. And so in exploring a story, and maybe that story is about identity in spiritual coaching, it's almost as if we're unraveling the conditional beliefs to see the truth of who we are underneath it all. And I want to give you an example. So when we meet a challenge in life, and that challenge could be in our workplace, it could be in a relationship, usually they are. It could be in a relationship with money or a relationship with lack. And if you are struggling with lack at the moment, my heart goes out to you. I hope my words will help. Now, lack can be lack of love, it can be lack of understanding, it can be a lack of money, lack of friends, it can be a limiting place that we find ourselves in. But when we unravel the circumstances of arriving at that place, that limited place, we realize that we had choices on the way that we might not have noticed because our head was too buried in the sands of lack of time, lack of space, lack of energy. I'm too busy, I haven't got enough. And that's a very human story. And in my coaching, in my formal counseling training, we approached problem solving, resolution with by looking at the way we process life, the way we behave when something happens. And I felt that life was not just about our cognition, not just about our thinking and understanding. Life has a spiritual aspect to it. Mine certainly did when I was growing up. It was called religion, but it was still very spiritual. And once I felt that dogma of a religious practice, then I moved away and searched for something else. I have to say, I am not seeking anymore because I have an understanding that I am that greater intelligence of life, is who I'm part of. And I want to try and illustrate that with a story. So the human story of limitation, my hugest story was when my son died by suicide. And immediately I found my body reacting to the shock. And our bodies are designed to that. They scan the whole time for alertness to danger. And perceiving the news of my son dying by suicide as complete and utter danger, I went into deep shock. Now, all the time I was in this deep grief, I kind of knew somewhere inside me that this was a choice. And there were kind of conversations going on inside my head. I don't know if you have that little person inside your head. I've got a few actually. One's a bit bossy and a bit judgmental. And the other voice in my head just asked me questions. How's this grief for you? Well, it stinks. It's too hard. It's too painful. I can't live. I can't breathe. I can't eat. I don't want to be here. I just want peace and ease. And then a friend said to me when I was explaining this, isn't that what Anthony wanted? And he did. And I believe that I can find that peace and ease in the middle of my grief challenge here on earth. My story can be Annie, the grieving mum, or it can be Annie that sometimes experiences grief and lives all the time with the missing of Anthony. And don't get me wrong, in the beginning, I found this challenging story of grief really hard to shake off. It consumed me. It was everywhere. And I had to ask for spiritual help. So in spiritual coaching, it's a way of seeing life from a higher perspective. So when I was learning about growth coaching, I remember my tutor saying, you can either be down in the mud wrestling with all the detail, expecting each one of your limitations to be resolved, or you can come to the helicopter view and see the greater perspective of where you are. So the helicopter view of my grief in the mud would be, I miss Anthony, look, he's not here, his room's empty, the house is empty, he'll never have a full life. I will always have this piece of him missing in spite of having a beautiful family still here on earth. And all I needed to do at that point was to be spiritually curious. And by spiritually curious, I'm not talking religious, I'm talking the kind of conversation that went on my head was, as I opened the patio door and I stood under the stars, which is something Anthony and I used to do. Well, it was more me, he just encouraged me. And I said to the heavens, to the spaciousness, okay, if you really are an infinite being, and I am, and this is just an experience of life, show me another perspective. I wondered at that point if there was another way to be with my grief. And when somebody comes to me for a coaching session, yes, I understand the psychological background. I understand the coaching, the counseling aspect of it. But I hear from an intuitive, spiritual place to what they're saying. And when you do that, when you are in contact with that greater being of who we really are, that spiritual being, your inner wisdom takes over. And the solutions that you find help all the limits and the challenges and the problems to fall away in that moment and for the truth to reveal itself. And I have seen this over and over and over in my practice. So what is spiritual coaching? It's a divine presence. I am present to you in our coaching session, and I deeply know that you are a spiritual being. You are part of the spiritual being I am. And that if you tell me your story, I will listen deeply and I will be compassionate, but I won't wrestle in the mud with it. Because you're stuck in that story and you've come to me for help. And so if I get in the story with you, then there's two of us in that stuck place. So for example, if somebody came to me about a relationship and a relationship that they saw had been loving and kind last week, and now this week was unkind, snappy, not working out. And in that relationship, those two people felt they'd had enough. Well, yeah, I would have had enough. I had enough of my grief. You get to a tipping point, and in that tipping point, you have a choice. Well, okay, let's step away from the mud and the wrestling and all that physical name calling and judgmental place that we're in where we think the other person is to blame, their behavior is appalling, they're not doing what we ask them to, whether that's in the workplace or a personal relationship or a family relationship. Let's step away from that and let's just wonder. Because that tiny crack of wonder reveals who you truly are in that moment and allows that still, quiet voice of wisdom to just share with you something that allows you to step out of it. When I taught children at school, and I had one child whose mum had died by suicide on holiday, and the child returned home and came back to school after we'd worked out a way for her to be able to come back to school, a safe way, because you feel very unsafe when you're feeling insecure in your life. And I said to her, let's imagine that we've got a cloak and it's a heavy cloak. Mine was a cloak of grief. Yours is a cloak of grief. Might be a cloak of falling out, lack of money, whatever that limitation is. Let's imagine that we can leave that cloak and step out of it and just wonder in that moment what it would be like. And at first there was a reluctance. No, can't do that. And we all know that space, don't we? When somebody gives us advice and we go, oh, no, in our heads or in our body or in our voice, we go, no, can't do that. Because we feel limited. We feel trapped. And so I said, okay, what about if we could have a holiday from our thinking just for a moment? Because it's the personal thinking, the limitations, the sadness, it doesn't mean that the grief goes away. It doesn't mean you'll stop missing your mum. That was the piece that she was worried about when I listened to her. I can't have a holiday from my thinking because I can't do that. My mummy has died. Her mum had transitioned. But you can. Doesn't mean you're not having a holiday from your love for your mum or even from the grief. You're just having space in that heavy thinking in that moment, and that's okay. And she did. And so the 1 or 2 seconds that she came and spent with me, and we just sat together, looking at the view actually out of the window in school. And then the adult who might come to me, who's upset about relationships in the family or upset about a relationship with a partner, or who is overly caring for someone, when we sit together and there is that spiritual connection that has no words, life seems to slow down. We get out of our own way. The personal story about Annie or the personal story about my client or the little child who lost her mum falls away in that moment. And we remember who we truly are. And that's what spiritual coaching is. It's remembering who you truly are without all the story in that moment. And you step back into the story, back into life's experiences differently each time. So thinking about your identity, We tend to identify with things and objects, and maybe even a bit with our possessions or where we work or how we speak or how our body is. And so what I want you to do today is to pause in that identity of who you are and see if there's a truth without all of those subject-object relationships. See if there's a person behind that. Not a person, actually, something bigger than a person. And I just want to read you something from the Heart of Prayer. It's not a religious prayer book, it's just a coming together. So it's about being without becoming. You might need to replay this. I had to read this a few times. In being without becoming, there's no movement of ourself, no dynamism, tension, attention, or devotion. That's where I get lost. I devote myself to everything. We don't go forwards towards that for which we long. In the same way you might long for things to be different, we don't go towards that. We sink into it, we acknowledge it, it's there. And this sinking takes place on the vertical dimension of being, not the horizontal dimension of becoming. It's a directionless direction that can't be known by the mind. Because you see, our mind makes things up. The minute we start to talk about something, and you probably did that when you were listening to my explanation, our mind, our brain brings in, through imagination and memory, all the things it thinks matches what the other person's talking about to make sense. But this, be without becoming, takes place in a directionless direction, a no-thing space that cannot be known by the mind. As Rumi said, live in silence, flow down and down in always widening rings of being. As we sink into being, our being is divested of the qualities that it derives from the content of our experience. We are more than the content of our experiences. Don't let them eclipse who you truly are. That's my bit. Back to Rumi. Live in silence, flow down and down in always widening rings of being. As we sink into being, our being is divested of the qualities that it derives from the content of experience and stands revealed as utterly intimate, yet impersonal, infinite being. I call it spiritual coaching, but it's really spiritual togetherness. And the side effect of spiritual togetherness is the release of the body, tension, and the agitation that your story brings to you. It's the letting go. And the mind and the body come to rest as an inevitable consequence of this self-abidance. Suffering is relieved of its seeking, revealed as peace and happiness. Our longing is revealed of its dynamism, and by goodness, I know that longing when Anthony transitioned. And it's revealed as love, and I can absolutely say yes to that. Longing, seeking, looking for the solution is the veiling of love. Love is a subsidence of longing. Stillness, quietness on the inside. You can have it while you're walking, while you're running, whilst you're cycling, whilst you're preparing a meal, whilst you're traveling. I use the breath to remind me to come home to the stillness of who I truly am. Spiritual coaching, spiritual connection. It's who you truly are. Take care, you Matt.